Good night. Welcome to Mindful Live number 48. I'm still in the past. Mindful Live 48. It is the third of the third month. I believe my first TikTok video was on this day a year ago. It wasn't my first contemplation, though. Already a year on TikTok. Wow, time flies. But yes, welcome to Mindful Live number 48. We're talking about what I did the contemplation on today, and the contemplation today was on the enemy of my enemy. And it deals with a technique that we see utilized all around in this world, where they attempt to use the enemy of someone's enemy. It's one of the ways, it is one of the ways that they are able to get things done in areas where they may not be able to get soldiers in. Now, I trace the history of this. The history of this, especially when you're talking about the US and the West, they have been doing this for a long time now. This has been their special modus operandi for quite some time now. They go into an area and they see, okay, well, this person is my enemy. These persons are also the enemies of the person who is my enemy, and we're going to use our mutual enemy to get something done. And starting off back in the 80s, when they did that in Afghanistan, they supplied training, they supplied resources, they supplied backup to some extent to the Mujahideen out in Afghanistan, who were the freedom fighters. Against the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was attempting to expand themselves, and as they expanded themselves, they were attempting to expand themselves southward into Afghanistan and to take Afghanistan. Now, the truth is, as the United States eventually found out themselves, it's actually very difficult to take Afghanistan. And even if you could take it for a momentary piece of time, you wouldn't hold on to it for very long. The territory makes it extremely difficult to do that. So they found out that the hard way, and the Soviet Union was eventually beaten. The Soviet Union retreated from their attempt at conquering Afghanistan. The Mujahideen effectively waged their war to remain a free state. Well, relatively free. But after they beat out the Soviets, what ended up happening is there was a cache of weapons left there. Now we're talking. Yes, there was a cache of weapons left there. The cache of weapons that was left there in Afghanistan, what that actually caused was a civil war. Because the Mujahideen, bear in mind Afghanistan, and this is something that actually happened in Africa too, when the Europeans went into Africa and attempted to divide up Africa for themselves. Africa wasn't divided up into countries before. It was tribes. Most of the humans that lived in Africa resided in tribes, in civilizations, and their boundaries were not the same boundaries as the country boundaries that the Europeans attempted to draw for them. Now, what ended up happening in Afghanistan, blessed night schizo, Afghanistan always had internal conflict. Of course, that's humanity. Conflict is the norm. War is more of the norm with humanity, just by the way. That isn't the exception. War is much more of the norm. So what ended up happening is those rival tribes were always rivals in Afghanistan, but previously they didn't have the requisite resources to be really effective rivals against each other. Now they changed from being rivals, they changed to being civil war. Well, they changed to a civil war that tore Afghanistan apart and impoverished and killed and maimed and saw a lot of people seeing really hard times back then. And that was because of that enemy of my enemy business. And obviously it didn't work. And then out of the Mujahideen, one specific group of the Mujahideen called Al-Qaeda, that was run by one specific Arabian prince named one Osama bin Laden. That group arose to global prominence, but they started in the Mujahideen back in the 80s, being sponsored by the US. There was CIA, I believe bin Laden himself would have gotten some training from Americans, and we see how that turned out in the long run. We see what happened in the long run. They fueled this. They sent resources into these freedom fighters there to fight the war on their behalf. And then what happened afterwards was chaos. And then in 1999, now the reason I stated this year was to allow people to understand that IS, the Islamic State, ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, the Islamic State of Iraq and Lebanon, yes, according to whichever name you choose to call it. That group with the black flags, they started actually in the 90s. They're a pretty old group. They were doing their thing for quite some time. But they didn't have the access to the amount of resources to really make them, well, extremely dangerous on a global scale. Then 2011 happened. Now, if you understand what happened in Syria, at least what is alleged to have happened in Syria, it makes what Russia is doing right now seem a lot less crazy. And it makes the Russian leadership seem just like the regular leadership of most of the global powers. Because Europe needs natural gas. Because Europe, in terms of moving away from the dirtier fuels, they are moving further into natural gas, because natural gas is generally a cleaner one of these fossil fuels. And they are moving more, well, not more, but they are sticking with natural gas, moving away from some of the dirtier fuels and more into natural gas. But the problem is Europe doesn't have much natural gas of its own, so they have to import that natural gas. As it is, they're importing a lot of it. I believe Germany is importing something like 55% of their natural gas from Russia, because Russia happens to have quite a lot of natural gas. Now, part of the problem over in Ukraine and Russia is that a lot of that natural gas actually flows through Ukraine, so that's some problems right there. But that isn't even the story that we're talking about now. You see, this problem where Europe needs this natural gas, they were trying to get it elsewhere than Russia for obvious reasons. They were trying to get someone else than Russia. So they went down to the Qataris. Now, Qatar is in a little corner of that, if you know your geography, that little kind of rectangular weird shape where where the Saudis are, etc. There, Qatar is a little small country down there in that Gulf there, and they didn't cut it, but they said they have resources to maintain supply even if Russia did cut it. So I'm not sure. I believe they stopped the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that was going to be built to run elsewhere than Ukraine. That's the one that was stopped. That pipeline, now we'll get into that even. Let me finish where I'm at right now, and then we'll get a little into that. So Europe was attempting to get that gas piped in from Qatar. That pipeline would have had to pass from Qatar through those Gulf states into Turkey, into Europe. Now, the problem with that is that it has to pass through Syria. And the problem with that is Syria is currently, and back then, they still were, allies of Russia. And Russia says, we don't like the idea of you getting gas elsewhere because we kind of like you paying us for the gas. So, you know what? Syria, let's not let that pipeline run through your country. And Syria did not let the pipeline run through their country. That was cancelled. And then something very strange happened. All of a sudden, as soon as this pipeline was cancelled, people realized over the intelligence agencies in the West realized that Assad, the president of Syria, was gassing his own people. Imagine that. The horror, the insanity. We cannot allow this to continue. This man must be removed, of course. So they began trying another regime change over in Syria, where they fueled the rebels, as they did for a lot of the Arab Spring uprisings. They fueled the rebels, they fueled the malcontents and the discontent people in the society to go out there and attempt to take over. And then that actually morphed into a full-on civil war inside of Syria, where one side is fighting against the next side. Now, what actually happened there is that on one side, there were several groups and organizations that were fighting against Assad. Now, the groups that were fighting against Assad would have been a myriad of groups. It wouldn't have been one group. And one of those groups was IS, the Islamic State. And they took that opportunity to take Western resources. They did actually fight Assad in Syria. That's why at one point in time they were considered ISIS, as in the last S in ISIS means Syria, as in the Islamic State of Syria. They had a stronghold there in Syria because they were given that opportunity, and they went on to spread. And we know what happened to ISIS eventually as that happened. They gained more and more power. Now, what ISIS actually had was that ideological power that was existing in the beginnings of the social media age. So what they did was they appealed internationally. The topic right now is the enemy of my enemy, the same topic as the contemplation today, where the West fuels the enemies of their enemies in foreign countries, leaving terrorists, etc., left back afterwards. So we're now on ISIS. We dealt with the Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda. Now we're with ISIS. And as usual, for any one of you tuning in here, if you miss piece of this live, you can go over to Facebook. Not Facebook. You can go over to YouTube, Nathan Springer over on YouTube, and subscribe there. Be sure to subscribe to Nathan Springer over on YouTube, and you can catch all of the Mindful Lives there, replayed for your enjoyment if you'd like. And the news stories that I do read during the live run behind me as I read them on YouTube. Good night, J. Chris. What's up? So you can feel free to go over on YouTube and subscribe, review all the lives there if you are so interested. All right, where was I? ISIS. Now, what ISIS had was the opportunity of this new world, a brand new world. They had social media. So they appealed on those ideological grounds for international people to come join this ideological fight over there. And it worked. People from Trinidad, I believe the number from Trinidad was in the hundreds. If I remember correctly, 140 something. It was a large number of people from Trinidad and a large number of people from all over the world flew over to the Middle East to fight on behalf of ISIS, to fight on ISIS' side. That's what happened. That's what happens with ideological wars that you are now able to evangelize for. They bring in these people. And now the problem that created was a lot of these ISIS fighters, after they spent some time fighting over there, would return to their home countries and further radicalize a larger group of people. It was like spreading of this extremist ideology as if it were a virus. They all come over here, they get it stronger, they go back to their homes and spread it further. And that is part of the reason right now there's a humanitarian crisis where a lot of children, wives, and even some former ISIS fighters are still stuck in refugee camps with their home countries refusing to take them back because they are afraid what these people will do if they come back, but they are stuck there. And that's what created that problem, these international fighters. Now, has the West learned its lesson after ISIS? That is an obvious rhetorical question because the obvious answer is no. And I don't like the crowd sheep mentality that the internet attempts to push onto a lot of us now. That when BLM took off, it was, you must change your profile picture to this black square, otherwise you are racist undercover or something else. So everyone was BLM and BLM and BLM. And then when it was COVID, everyone was COVID and wear your mask and vaccinate and etc. I don't like that kind of social contagion effect of it all. And then when you look over now at the internet, how they're treating this Ukraine crisis, they're attempting to do with it a very similar thing. That similar kind of social contagion thing where exactly I can see who skips. Oh, jeez. My goodness. I hate those things. But They're attempting to do a very similar thing to that now, where they're attempting now to put pressure on everyone. If you do not say exactly the things in favor of in favor of Ukraine, that means you are a horrible person, and you think that what Vladimir Putin is doing is the right thing, and he should murder all those innocent people inside of Ukraine. That's the narrative that is being attempted to push right now, but that's not actually the case. You can watch at this and think about it critically, and not allow anybody to push you into any view. You are not forced to take a view. You can have the view that you shouldn't go invading countries, invading independent sovereign countries. You should never do that. And that is not a good thing, regardless of who does it. And you could hold that view. That's nothing wrong with that. And bear in mind, while you're holding that view, bear in mind, the United States invaded Vietnam without just cause. The United States invaded Iraq without just cause. Remember, weapons of mass destruction that were never found. The United States invaded Afghanistan. Now, when they invaded Afghanistan, the reason was for Osama bin Laden. But some of you may not remember news from back then. Gladly, I do a bit. They said they went to Afghanistan, to the Taliban, and told them, hand over bin Laden. And the Taliban basically told them, well, what is your evidence that bin Laden did this? And they said, we don't need any evidence. And they invaded the country. That is insane. You don't invade countries like that. But bear in mind, the United States did that. So when people are speaking like they're speaking from a moral high ground, understand that clearly. Good night, Wendy Media Mixer. Understand that clearly, that invasions from superpowers isn't a strange thing, especially coming from the Americans. Now, you could hold the view that invasions are a horrible thing. You could hold that view. But you could also hold the view that you do not know exactly what is going on in Ukraine. So you cannot speak on this like you're sure you're in full support of everything Ukrainian. You don't know. And the history there is indeed complicated also. So, we don't know. Now, here is the fact. The fact of the matter is right now, Ukraine has a neo-Nazi problem. Ukraine has a neo-Nazi problem. If you're seeing videos out there right now with black and brown people being pushed off of buses, being forbidden from entering trains, etc., etc., it's no surprise. They have a Nazi problem. Now, here's the delicate balance in it. And this, to me, shows the fingerprint of those foreign three-letter organizations. You know those three-letter organizations, CIA, MI6, NSA, etc., 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 etc. It shows kind of the fingerprints of those three-letter organizations, because the president and prime minister of Ukraine are both Jewish. The president is fully Jewish, and I believe the prime minister is of Jewish heritage. Now, if anyone knows anything about Nazis, Nazis and Jews, you know. And to me, that says something directly about very likely there being some of that three-letter agency influence, because you have right now the military side in Ukraine having a full-on Nazi battalion. You know, these guys wear Nazi armbands, they fly Nazi flags, they have actual children's camps where they teach their little children how to be a nice little Nazi. Who is a good little Nazi? Yes, they have all of that there. Yeah. And on the government state political side, you have Jewish people. What a coalition to have. That sounds like the dealings of three-letter agencies. That's what that sounds like. That's what they do. They look to get the opposites. So, you know, they're trying to ensure they maintain the balance. You know, you don't want it to go too much to this side, so you have a counterbalance to this side. That looks exactly like what they do. That looks like their handiwork. Anyway, you have this literal Nazi brigade inside of the Ukrainian National Guard. And that Nazi brigade was responsible for the murder of, I believe it was 35 unarmed unionists in 2014. How many ever years that? 2014 or 15? 14. They murdered them by burning down the building they were inside. By the way, when Putin says he's going to denazify Ukraine, that's what he's referring to. And he is saying he's going there to capture these people who killed, murdered 35 people who were unarmed. So there is that. And now what is actually happening is the West is sponsoring these Nazi fighters, giving them arms and ammunition. Now, here's the thing. There are racists in every country. It's not an indictment against your country that there are racists there. And it's not an indictment against your country for there to be racist people fighting on behalf of your country. That's okay. I mean, if someone attempted to invade Trinidad and everyone was fighting, we would have racist people fighting on our side too, because there are racists in Trinidad. But here's the problem with that. The problem with that is over in Ukraine now. The racists aren't just fighting as part of the Ukrainian military. They have literally their own battalion inside of the military. So picture this. Think of it this way. It's like, imagine the US military, where you have the Navy, you have their Marines, you have their Rangers, etc., etc., etc. Imagine you have the KKK 1st Battalion inside of the US Army, the US military. You know, when you look at all their battalions and regiments, etc., they have the KKK 1st Regiment. Nathan, I see you wearing red. You're looking a little bit... USSR doesn't exist anymore. USSR was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union doesn't exist. It's only Russia. Father Ruska. Anyway, imagine if the US military had the first KKK battalion inside there. Imagine that. The US military had that. What would we think of that? And that is what is occurring over in Ukraine. There are videos these men are releasing. They're dipping their bullets in pigs' blood. The idea is it's a anti-Islam idea where when they shoot the Chechens are an Islamic minority ethnic group in Eastern Europe. Hey bro, good night. Always a big fan of your content. Thank you, Ronald Ward. The Chechens are a minority group in Eastern Europe. Right now, they're on the side of the Russians. Now, the Chechens are known to be warlike people in the first place, to be very fair. They fight quite a bit. But the idea is that they want to dip the bullet in pig's blood so that when they shoot them, they don't go to heaven. It's an anti-Islamic thing. But no surprise coming from neo-Nazis. And then what we are also seeing is that people are welcoming fighters from all over the world. Go over there to help those poor Ukrainian people. And what is happening is all the wannabe neo-Nazis from all over the world, all those skinheads itching for a chance to shoot a gun, shoulder to shoulder with my white brothers. Shoulder to shoulder with my white brothers. All of them, they're going over to Ukraine for that opportunity. And they are being sponsored to do so because the arms and ammunition are being flooded into Ukraine from the West. And let's say enough arms and ammunition moved into Ukraine for Ukraine to fend off the Russians. What do you think is going to happen to a neo-Nazi brigade after they no longer have a war to fight in Ukraine? What are they going to do next? What are the neo-Nazis from all over the world that go there and fight and get that combat experience, get that battle experience? What do you think they are going to do when they get back home to their home countries? What do you think they will do? Do you think they will just go back to a regular day job? Or would they then be dreaming of that white motherland? Now, to show you how very strange all of this is in attempting to get you to choose sides, there's an article that nearly seems too ridiculous to be true. From The Intercept, Facebook allows praise of neo-Nazi Ukrainian battalion if it fights Russian invasion. The reversal raises questions about Facebook's blacklist-based content moderation, which critics says lacks nuance and context. Facebook will temporarily allow its billions of users to praise the Azov Battalion, a Ukrainian neo-Nazi military unit previously banned from being freely discussed under the company's dangerous individuals and organizations policy, The Intercept has learned. The policy made this week is pegged to the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine and preceding military escalations. The Azov Battalion, which functions as an armed wing of the broader Ukrainian white nationalist Azov movement, began as a volunteer anti-Russia military before formally joining the before formally joining the Ukrainian National Guard in 2014. The regiment is known for its hardcore right-wing ultra-nationalism and the neo-Nazi ideology pervasive among its members. Though it has in recent time downplayed its Nazi sympathies, it has been quite obvious. Its leadership has reportedly courted American alt-right and Nazi elements, and in 2010, the battalion's first commander and a former Ukrainian parliamentarian, Andrei Beletsky, stated that Ukraine's national purpose was to lead the white races of the world into a final crusade against Semite-led Untermenschen, which means subhumans. Bear in mind, if you just so happen to have some melanin in your skin, which I would presume 90% of the people, probably 99.99% of the people looking at this live do, if you have that little bit of melanin in your skin, well, you are part of that Untermenschen that this guy was referring to. And now, when he says they want to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade, what does he mean? What exactly does he mean? Wow, author Malcolm, coming in from left field there randomly. So, what does he mean by that? And here's the part about that statement that is really strange. Here's the part of that statement that is really strange. When he's talking about a crusade, if you know anything about the crusades of old, crusades were not done in your homeland. If Trinidad and Tobago wants to mount a crusade, you don't do a crusade as a Trini inside of Trinidad. Good night, Fayed Muhammad. You do crusades where your enemies are located. And according to him, his enemies are the Semite-led Untermenschen subhumans. So, if their goal in that Azov battalion is to lead the white races around the world into a final crusade against the Untermenschen, that sounds to me like a global plan. That right now, bear in mind, the man who said this was the leader of that group, right? The man who said this was the leader of that group. And right now, that group is getting sponsorship of arms and ammunition from international bodies. Now, I do not want to hear my Prime Minister mention anything about sponsoring anything over in Ukraine, sir. Please do not. You can say that you are not for war and invasion, but let's not send any of our money over there. Shy Panda. I think I saw Shy Panda today in Massey. Is it everyone in this live is a giant? I saw this guy, and I am not a short guy, and someone was like, "Hey, Nathan," and they pulled along the mask, and I was like, "Wow, this is a large person." And he was like, "Hey boy, Shy boy." I was like, "Yeah, bro. Yeah, there's only giants in this chat." I could understand why many ladies may like to enter this chat. I'm just saying they are tall, educated, knowledgeable people in mindful lives. So as a young lady, it's a good place to stick around. Join the chat. All right. According to internal policy materials reviewed by The Intercept, Facebook will allow praise of the Azov battalion when explicitly and exclusively praising their role in defending Ukraine or their role as part of the Ukraine's National Guard. Yeah, that's what's going on right now in Ukraine. And that's what the Western world is sponsoring more of. Imagine that. The Western world is sponsoring that. And how do we think it's going to end? That's all right, Hex Senpai. That's fine. That's good enough. Intelligent is good enough. Intelligent and healthy goes a really long way. You don't need much more than that. All right. Let's get into some local news now. Let's get into a little bit of the local news, see what's going on home here. And this is actually the name, strangely enough, of the live tonight. I'm sure some people would be looking at the live, watching the name and listening to the majority of the first bit being about Russia and wondering what's this name about. The name is actually about this following article that is coming up here. This following article that is coming up here that has to do with the launching of investigations into the very sad and tragic occurrence that happened in Trinidad. No, it's not Schoon. Schoon has been charged, I believe, finally. I'm not sure what the charges were. I believe I just browsed past that article sometime a couple of days ago. But yes, PM awaits independent findings before saying more. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley yesterday said he will await the findings of the independent investigation before saying anything more on the 4 divers who were sucked into a pipeline last Friday and subsequently died. I note the sorrow, the trauma, the loss, the emotions, the malice, and the political ambition, Rowley said. I am able to differentiate them all. Now here's the thing. Granted, Dr. Rowley himself has his own political ambitions. He's a politician, obviously. He's a politician. So obviously he has his own political ambitions. How people making me out here? I think otherwise you can make me out. I am recognizable otherwise. Just as Hex Senpai says. But what he said here, to go back to the Prime Minister, what he said here actually makes a lot of sense to me. There is sorrow, there is trauma, there is loss, there are emotions, but there's also malice and political ambition. And I'm not going to speak directly on that, but it seems very obvious in this, that there's political ambition here. That seems very obvious. There are political ambitions. Now, is it necessarily a bad thing if you have political ambitions and you see a tragedy going on and you go there and attempt to help, but obviously you have your political ambitions there also? Is that such a bad thing? Maybe not. But the fact is, there are a lot of political ambitions in and around this entire case. And I think people really do need to be very careful when they're dealing with very sensitive matters such as this, how you further your political ambitions through this. That's enough said. That's enough said on the political ambitions part. Sorry. But the investigation has been officially started at least. Although no action has been taken against Paria, the investigation has been announced. No action against Paria's probe team announced. An independent 5-member committee has been selected to conduct an investigation into last Friday's incident, which led to the death of 4 of the 5 LMCS Limited divers who were contracted by the state-owned Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited to perform underwater maintenance on a sea pipe. The committee comprises of Attorney of Law Shiv Sharma, who will serve as its chairman, Gregory Wilson, who holds 25 years experience in the oil and gas industry and is a professional and is a professional subsea specialist with first-hand experience in deepwater diving. Eugene Tia, who recently retired as executive chairman, Energy and Industrial Gases Business Unit, Massey Energy, and a representative each from British Petroleum, BP, and Shell. The government, through the Ministry of Energy, has taken a decision to ensure that this 5-member panel is completely independent and staffed with top professionals in those areas. The critical ones will be the representatives from British Petroleum and Shell, Young said. Young said he has been engaged in conversations with both the heads of operations in Trinidad and a meeting on Thursday with Eugene Okpari, the head of Shell's operations in Trinidad and Tobago. What we're asking them for is to ensure that the 2 representatives are specialists in these areas. He noted that he has asked BP and Shell to not limit their representatives to nationals of Trinidad and Tobago, but find the right persons. Scope of the committee. The Energy Minister said the scope of the committee will include, but not be limited to, the following. So this is the scope that they're going to get into. This is the scope that this committee is going to get into. 1. Ascertain the scope of works issued by PARIA for the exercise. 2. Ascertain the proposed selection plan submitted by LMCS to conduct the work at the material site, i.e. the proposed plan put in by LMCS to conduct the work, which must include a safety element. 3. To examine generally the policy, procedures, practices, and conduct relating to its employees and organize labor for these types of maintenance exercises for PARIA and other companies, to identify the precise facts and circumstances which led to and resulted in the loss of life and whether this was reasonable and justifiable in the particular circumstances. 5. To examine all the decisions and actions taken after it became clear that the 5 LMCS divers went missing. 6. To investigate the nature, extent, and application of any standing orders, policy consideration, legislation, or other instructions in dealing with the situation which gave rise to this unfortunate and tragic incident. 7. To identify whether PARIA and LMCS employed sufficient safeguards and measures to ensure the safety of its contracted employees. 8. To determine the adequacy and mechanical integrity of equipment utilized by LMCS. 9. To determine the adequacy of LMCS's plans which were utilized for the operation. 10. To identify whether by act or omission any identified or unidentified party that directly or indirectly caused loss of life. And 11. To examine the roles played by PARIA and LMCS through its respective units, individually and collectively, in dealing with this incident. Right. So I wanted to make sure I read through all 11 of the different scopes of this investigation. Now, judging from just the scope, if we are to look from just the scope alone, this seems like a pretty broad scope. This seems like a scope that would include most of what the population wants to know. So, if to judge from the scope, this seems good. Who is the second person? Somebody asked. The second person is Gregory Wilson, who holds 25 years experience in the oil and gas industry and is a professional subsea specialist with first-hand experience in deep water diving. That's the second person. And yes, Nisi 1321, you are obviously up with the news. They were given 45 days to conduct this investigation. From the second person on that panel. Why is that schizo? No, it's... Why is that? Why are you walking away from the second person on that panel? Is there some information there already? And the other two that remain unnamed from this 5-person committee are the 2 experts that are to be provided from BP1 and Shell 2. However, the opposition is saying they don't want BP and Shell in that investigation. Opposition tells BP, Shell, stay out of Paria inquiry. Opposition Senator Wade Mark and Pointe-a-Pierre MP David Lee are calling on energy companies BP and Shell to stay out of the probe into the incident in which 4 divers died. While doing maintenance work on an underwater pipeline, Mark cited possible conflicts of interest in the relationship between Shell, BP and the government and an opportunity for cover-up. We know that both Shell and BP depend on the government for approvals and licenses. We also know that the Ministry of Energy is the regulator of Shell's and BPTT's operations in TNT. We also know that Shell and BPTT are intimately involved in the Atlantic LNG facility, as well as the 102 megawatt solar farm, which has cost them, and by extension, the taxpayers, over US 300 million. Yes, Paria is government owned. Look into BP Galeota incident. Wow. Okay, Schizo, I will. And I don't understand this from the opposition, though. I don't concur with this. So, because BP does business with the government, as nearly any company that does anything in Trinidad would have to do, because a lot of the business in Trinidad is controlled by the government. So, are they saying that no company... I like that too, actually, Ria. Are they saying that no company, not one that does any business with the government, should be allowed in this investigation? Does that actually make sense to anyone? That because BP and Shell does business with the TNT government, that would make it impossible for them to facilitate a professional and expert from their ranks to join an independent investigation? I don't get that. I don't get that. Mark also said he was advised by sources that Paria's general manager Mushtaq Mohammed worked with BPTT. Mohammed previously worked at BPTT as manager of procurement and supply chain and vice president of corporation operations. Now, here's the thing. That's the nature of the oil industry. That's the nature of the oil industry. Everyone in the oil industry, by and large, switches in between as they go further on in their portfolios. That's not an uncommon thing. So how are you supposed to get someone that never once did any kind of work for the government? That does not make sense to me. That does not make sense to me. I don't understand that. I wondered if Nathan sleep well last night. He went the next morning. I know he's a man that's keep the battery low. Yeah. He's asking, how can you have BPTT investigating a former senior manager who is at the center of controversy? That is a conflict of interest and a contradiction in terms, and that is why we are saying BPTT must withdraw. But here's the thing. BPTT is not doing this investigation. A 5-member committee that includes an expert from BPTT is doing the investigation. How does that translate to BPTT itself doing the investigation? That does not make sense. And if the person is an expert, they're doing that investigation based on their expertise and on the track record of their expertise. I am not sure just sweeping things randomly under the rug for a senior manager in BP that they may have never known is going to be worth it for them. I don't concur with that at all. Lee said UNC would like to be aware of the terms of reference of the committee, which I just read, the scope and limitations of the committee's members or areas of knowledge, which I believe would be given subsequently. If you go back to the last committee that laid a report in Parliament on the COVID-19, the terms of reference were not broad enough. Enough time was not given to that committee, so the report was very narrow. And in that statement, I kind of agree. The second member of that panel was also a worker of BP. Oh, well, it seems like the opposition sources weren't very thorough. But on that note, showing the last committee and the problems with that, I agree. As I was saying, was it last night or night before, that it does seem like Trinidad is committee country. What a random question. What a random question, Author Malcolm. I think I do. Yeah. Okay. But yes. That one kind of threw me off guard a bit. Trinidad does seem to be Trinidad does seem to be committee country where everything, yes, everyone has a six-pack. It's just that some of it is, hidden under layers of fat. Where everything in Trinidad seems to end up back at a committee where they hire a committee to go and get this done. And I said that I really find that a lot of this committee talk seems to be absconding from the responsibility, that they're pushing the responsibility on a committee, knowing that the committee obviously isn't going to find anything really that would implicate anyone in positions of power, and that the committee report after 45 days, I would be very interested. Trust me, after 45 days, I would be looking to see that report. But I am very much aware that the vast majority of people would not. Many of the people right now who are really broken up about this divers incident, in 45 days would have forgotten about it. Now, Mario, what you are saying there about OSHA International actually is a good point, because that's actually what they're asking for. They said, Mark and Lee suggested that international bodies be brought in to provide fair oversight. These included the United Nations Global Compact. I don't understand that one thoroughly, because I believe the UN Global Compact is just an agreement between businesses. I don't know if they have any investigation powers. They're also asking for the International OSH, Occupational Health and Safety Regulatory Committee, the International Labour Organization, and the FBI. Now, I'm laughing because it seems ridiculous. Now, I know, here's the thing. It could seem more ridiculous than it is, because the FBI actually does do some investigation in Trinidad. It isn't actually unheard of. The FBI has been in Trinidad before, helping along with some investigation. So it's not unheard of to ask for their help. But it just seems kind of strange, you're asking for the FBI in this case. But do you think, here's the question. I'd leave YouTube and Instagram with here. Do you think that this committee that's going to do this investigation is going to bring up anything worthwhile? Do you think, or do you trust what the results of this investigation is going to be? I don't know if I do. Anyway, that's all I have for now for you folks over on Instagram and YouTube. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and do tune in tomorrow again for the last Mindful Live for this week. And I'll see you then tomorrow at 9:30. I'll be around for a very short time again on TikTok here. And you can come there if you'd like to hang out a bit until, if not, I will see you